So I'd like to welcome everybody to our session on ESSA surveys and feedback reports. As a brief introduction, my name is Ryan Balch. I'm the CEO of My Student Survey. A little background on myself. I'm a former teacher for 7 years. Taught high school math, physics, biology, and psychology. I have a doctorate on developing surveys within education, and I'm the former director of the teacher, leader, and school evaluation for Baltimore City Schools. For My Student Survey, we're a provider of surveys that really seeks to improve learning outcomes for students and engage stakeholders by administering research-based surveys that promote high-quality instructional practice. So for today, our primary objective is I want to go over the measures of school quality and student success within ESSA. Some of you are there present for our webinar last week, so I'm going to give a real quick summary of it and really kind of dive into some of the details. I want to go through the choice about whether to use an existing survey versus creating a survey using an established validation framework that I'll talk about. Next piece is recommendations for administering surveys, as well as different ways you can scoring using surveys within accountability systems. And finally, last thing we'll talk about are characteristics of ideal feedback reports. So real quick, a brief overview that you saw last week was ESSA requires states to determine measures of improvement on both tests, and we have some academic indicators such as proficiency rate, graduation rate, growth, and ELL proficiency, as well as one school quality or student success indicator. And this is really the primary one that we're going to be focusing on today, is how you can measure some of these quote-unquote either non-cognitive, as they're called, or holistic, whole student, but non-test data type of measures within an accountability system. The characteristics, according to the law, is that it has to allow for meaningful differentiation in performance. It's valid, reliable, comparable, and statewide, with the same indicator or indicators used for each grade span. And it must use one of the following measures that's described. And we've seen this before. You can use student engagement, educator engagement, student access to and completion of advanced coursework, post-secondary readiness, school climate and safety, and any other indicator the state chooses that meets the requirements. An important note is that all of these measures have to be disaggregated by subgroup. And secondly, a lot of interpretation of what these measures look like has not been specified, so it allows a lot of flexibility for states. So as you're starting to define it, we wanted to think about how surveys are going to fit into this equation. So surveys can address a few of the indicators that we listed. They could be measuring student engagement, could be measuring educator engagement, as well as the school climate and safety topics. And to address the subgroup piece, you can use roster information and unique logins for each student or stakeholder so that surveys can be calculated and aggregated by subgroup. Next piece is that surveys, we have to think about it, that they can be combined with quantitative measures. And this may be a way to balance some of the strengths and weaknesses of various measures together. And you can even look at the same construct using multiple measures, multiple sources of instruments. For example, we're offering a joint solution with Advanced Ed where they use their certified observation system of student engagement with our classroom level survey, so you get both the credibility of the observation as well as the voice coming from the student side. So there's lots of different ways that you can have surveys by themselves in combination with other instruments and so forth. So one of the pieces that I think a lot of states would be important to address is you have the option to choose an existing survey, a previously validated survey, or develop a customized survey. And it really is, I'd say both are very strong options for states. It's just a question of there are certain advantages of either side that I want to walk through. So advantages of using a previously validated survey. Quicker time to implementation. So it's already done. There's no validation work. You're ready to go. There is a sense of credibility. Sometimes there might be national knowledge or the longevity or the results that are had in other places that can lend to that credibility. I will say, and this is helpful for, within my experience in Baltimore City, This factor actually sometimes matters less with teachers as much as their ability to know how it was created. The credibility when it's foreign or non-immediate to them sometimes doesn't actually play as much of a role as you might think. The next piece is that the advantage is it requires less initial investment of time and funds. So you have to think about, do we want to put the work and build it up front, or do we want to just get this out and be ready to go? So when you look at the advantages of developing a new survey, there's a couple pieces when you think about stakeholder engagement. When you go through a validation framework that I'll show you in just a second, you can really involve, through the use of focus groups, you can really involve a lot of different stakeholders, such as parents, students, teachers, unions, community members, principals, and so forth, using focus groups. And they can have input. Number one, it's an evidence as part of your validation framework. But number two, the buy-in and engagement is, cannot be undersold that, you can really talk that piece up afterwards because you went about it the right way. The second piece is thinking about the alignment to what your state context and goals are. Sometimes there's a matching process of, well, this is what we want to measure, and here are the instruments that are out there. And there's never going to be an exact fit. You can kind of go with things that will be passable and the best fit possible. But if you really want to start with your values, start with a set of standards, start with a set of priorities, it really is helpful to go through and have an exact match to go through this development, which I'll talk about. And the other part is that ownership rights. When we think about long-term benefits, if you're thinking about it over the course of, we are committed to doing student voice, parent engagement, whatever it may be. The long-term benefits of that ownership really weigh out at the end, and so there's definitely some advantages for that. So if you're thinking about developing your own survey, I want to offer a validation framework that's been really well established within the research and give you a sense of what it looks like to develop your own survey. It's not that far. I would say it usually can be accomplished within a year time frame to do it very thoroughly. And that part of your piloting, for instance, during the no-stakes year of 16-17, part of this can happen during that year to really go through and finalize the instrument. But really, the theoretical framework is that you start with construct validity in the middle, which just means, are you measuring what you think you're measuring? You think about the right content up at the top, where am I asking about the right questions? Where are these based on research and so forth? The next part is thinking about teacher interviews. This could be any stakeholder group. This could be focus groups with parents and so forth. And that's where part of your evidence for measuring the right thing is coming from the perception of your stakeholders. The next piece is thinking about cognitive interviews. Now, this varies by audience. So for students, you'd want to interview them, ask them what they think the question means, see if it matches up to your objective. This can be a similar process for any type of climate survey. You'd really want to get this information from students to make sure that they understand the questions. And then the last two pieces are really about large-scale pilot tests. You administer the survey and whatever sample makes the most sense for what you're trying to do. And you try to establish, does it align with other things like school quality, achievements, whatever those measures are that we are looking at. And that's when you do a lot of your analytical work using pilot data. So it's not unimaginable to go through this process. It takes some work, it takes some manpower, it takes some investment, but it really does, it's a long-term solution. So something to think about. So you can, as an example, some of the surveys that we do, we have things like our STEP survey, which does classroom level survey, measuring student engagement and teacher practice. You could aggregate it to the school level. We have a climate survey that does engagement, safety, environment, parent survey that does similar safety, climate, engagement, and a staff survey measuring educator engagement, support, and collaboration. And these are ones that you could use that are previously existing, or it may be that we really want to go down that path of customization. So I want to give some survey administration recommendations. So we've been doing high-stakes surveys since 2010, and there's a lot of learning and knowledge that you gain after going through it that many times in that many different places. So I wanted to pass some recommendations of, we're thinking about doing surveys. What are the things that we need to be thinking about? And the first part is communication plans. And this is not something that's going to be foreign, but the successful administrations start early, they communicate often, they have a systematic plan. It's coordinated with important stakeholders. So you have parent groups on board that are pushing out messages, co-writing messages, co-signing messages, working with teachers' unions to host information set, all these different pieces. You want that communication to be systematic, cohesive, and in as many different forms as possible, through email, social medias, and also things like interactive sessions, Q&A, online sessions that we hosted those in Baltimore City very successfully, where we'd have hundreds of people who submit their questions and we'd be answering them. And we'd have in-person listening sessions around the district. So this is having a survey not feel like it's just something new or another thing and it's a distinct plan at the beginning of the year is helped by this. The next part is sampling. So sometimes this can be the hardest part in order to get minimum responses. But you need to be thinking through what % minimum do we want for something like a parent survey, something like a student survey, a staff survey, and so forth. And below this, you have a minimum, below this that, they can either receive a 0 or a fraction of the points, however you want to incorporate that. But that minimum response rate does, it does really help in terms of providing a push for schools to be able to invest in the initiative as well. The other thing is that often when you get surveys back, I would have a suggestion of potentially weighting responses to ensure representation. So sometimes you get an oversampling of either certain demographics, certain income levels, and so forth. So there's potential to do some of this weighted responses to make sure you're hearing from a representative group in the district, not just the people that are most likely to take the survey. Utilizing a system of survey coordinators, there's a lot of different pieces that happen within the school, and having somebody that knows the context and local one, that's a really highly effective system. Many places use this for testing coordinators. Sometimes it can be the same person, but often having this in place and then developing resources. So you want to be able to have somebody be able to walk into this and have all the resources and sources they need about calendars, FAQs, information, screenshots of all the systems and so forth. So really, it's worth the investment on the trainings, the guidebooks, the webinars, and so forth. That's really allowed us a high degree of success in some survey administration, is that they've got these frontline resources, and we're answering very few questions on technical assistance because they have a lot of go-to pieces. So the other piece, and this is, sometimes these next two are the not, fun side to think about, but when people think about incorporating qualitative measures or surveys, there's a potential for distrust. And so one of the ways of really trying to enhance that, your protocols, is really trying to think about how you can prevent manipulation. You can draw a lot of lessons from your testing protocols in terms of using proctors to administer surveys, particularly when you think about classroom-level surveys. Thinking about your distribution and collection protocols, as in it is kept stored in this location, it is brought to classroom at X time, it is brought back by this process. And we started integrating random protocol audits. So this is, you sign up, this is your day of administration, randomly you have people show up that just monitor, a test monitor type of situation where they're going to look at, are you following the protocols that you set, do they follow the guidelines, and so forth. And that gives some of that perception of credibility. And then also thinking about screening procedures, where this is on the back end. Once you already have the data, we really want to be looking for potential gain responses, potential responses where somebody didn't feel like taking the survey. Whatever it is, time spent on survey, a lot of these different pieces are important to put in so that you can analyze the data, investigate any potential issues, as well as you can remove individual answers. A couple things about scoring. So you can take the overall score of the survey results, put it within as a piece of the pie or whatever it is. But there's also options that you can use that data. It could be the use of survey data. Now again, what are we trying to incentivize? So instead of incentivizing having a high score, which could potentially lead to some of these gaming behaviors, you could potentially rate a school by its principal or administrators of the school It could be a principal, supervisor, area superintendent. That is one metric in which they're used is this: you have your survey data, how is this going to drive your plan? And creating a rubric that's able to identify scores within several different areas of how they're using the survey data. Again, you want that to be measured, you want that to be part of it, and that's one potential way to do it. There's also a couple different, you can either do it in a norm reference fashion. So for instance, if you're in the 75th percentile in the school, you're highly effective. Or criteria, which is, if you have a 3 or above, that means most people agree that the school is safe, therefore you get X designation. People kind of are not a big fan of the norm reference game because then it's, there's always going to be a winner and there's always going to be a loser in the game. But it's also helpful because you don't want everybody to score in the top category. So some potential solutions that we've used previously are thinking about using pilot data to establish the cut point. So you might establish the 75th percentile is 2.94, and then you could set it at 3.0, so you'll get a relative sense of the distribution of what it'll look like. Theoretically, what people appreciate that all schools, doesn't matter who you are, you can be in that top category. It also helps with potential identification of your bottom 5% of schools and so forth. So using this kind of combination of here's your set cut points, but they're based on some previous data is a positive way of doing that. And then I would also encourage you to think about a choose your own adventure model, where it's always a dilemma between how do you reward high performance or do you reward growth and performance. And there are ways that you can set up a system where you get points for being a high-performing school in whatever area it is, and you could also get points for being a high-gaining school. And in some sense, you can take whichever one makes your school look better. That's the one that you go with within the system. We've used those pretty effectively before, and people really appreciate some of that differentiation. So characteristics of ideal feedback report. So you've got the data, you've gone through administration, successful, you have your survey, and now you want to make this data usable. These are some of the really successful things that we've found within reports, and I'm going to show you a couple examples too that will help with that data display. First is, pretty simply, an ability to compare to other schools. Some people, even if you say you're in this, you're a 3.1 and that means most people agree, they still need to have some context about where I fall. So that we found that very helpful as opposed to toxic. Identifies the areas of strength and areas of focus in a strategic fashion. So it's possible to just say, hey, here's where you got the highest and here's where you got the lowest. But that may not be the most meaningful information. There are certain items on every survey that are more challenging or more difficult than others. And so if you identify the lowest, it might just be one that everybody scored out low. But you might be doing it better than other people, just everybody was lower. So it really is thinking about how can I do a mathematical comparison of my school in relationship to other schools, and to see what am I doing differently than these other schools. A variety of ways you can do that, percentiles, Z-scores, and so forth. But it's using it in a strategic way rather than just a simple to understand way necessarily, because you want people acting on the right behaviors. And that's really where you get the win on it. Another piece is using the data to identify model teachers in schools. So having that data available in an easy fashion for either principal to say, hey, I see that Ms. Johnson is, very good at this specific teaching practice. I want to make sure that I connect her with maybe a teacher that's struggling. Similarly, with the school level, is that I see that this school is really getting some high scores, more than anybody else, on their measures of, parent attendance at, say, a community event. And you want to pair them or learn from them and have them present at meetings to share what those best practices are. So having that comparison in a very easy way allows for a now what conversation. Second piece is thinking about open-ended comments. Now, this really is more challenging to fit within a scoring system. But again, we're thinking about not just how do we get a piece of the pie, we're also thinking about how do people use it. And so collection of open-ended comments are sometimes, it's a Pandora's box. You never know what you're going to get. You can do some level of filters, but people find it some of the most valuable feedback and useful pieces of what they collect. And finally, the thing that I would emphasize the most of any piece is allowing people to take the data and answer the question of now what. So some of the ways that we've been able to do that, we incorporate some, I'll show you in a second, we incorporate some functionality that allows for an action plan to be created. We have video libraries for teachers that they can, if they get a lower score in a certain practice, they can go to videos that very clearly show them some model teachers and so forth. Another idea is thinking about a collection of best practices. So once you have had something identified as an area of strength, it allows you to share what that best practice is within a school, and that school collects a warehouse database of these best practices by whatever items, or schools and put it in the district to see the best practices. And those are things that can be shared within the context of it. So it really is going to be, okay, I've got the data, and now how do I form my action plan for it?
So here you'll see a system report that shows a lot of the characteristics in a visual way of what we do. So this is, in this case, it's a classroom level student survey. We're looking at results score, and this is at the district level, where we're going to see an overall snapshot of school performance. We can then drill down a little bit more into a school level report, which is school get a snapshot of teachers performance, as well as school performance in various categories, district or state. You also have areas of focus strength at the school level. Identify so that a principal might be able to take some of these as inform their school life professional sharing practice. We go down, we're going to take a look at individual report, and at the top you'll see the categories listed. So teacher did parents, school, also see how they did survey. And so we get down into one of those categories, you can see, again, comparison interest and comparative information. Well, items. Cool. Now, within each category, we have one area of focus. We also have an area of strength. So this area of focus, as you can see, it's really in which could be a lot of tools as well, in which we're looking at. We want to make a connection between here and top. To answer some of this now, we also ask people to create an action. This might be the area where you have listed. You're able to write with your stuff. And you can also full video library where you can go through and see here are some additional features that the video use to be able to fill out. It really does need to. And then in this template here, is be able to put in their email with the principal, supervisor, and so forth, and it allows them to be able to have that written by the answers that. Now, there's also a little bit of a characteristic that we talked about, collecting open-ended content. Now, this is an example of a character survey. So you can see all the different categories for the parent survey, but that's what I directed to here, where you open-ended comments, whether it be strengths or areas of improvements and so forth. This is a helpful component, even if it's not ability in schools. So as we switch back to one, the characteristics, the key characteristics, I think we're thinking about the idea of feedback reports, the comparison, areas of strength and focus, model teachers, opening comments, specifically. There's some questions you might be asking yourself now that you've seen information of surveys as well as feedback reports is really what can construct you want to measure. Surveys capture that information. That's the way. Are you going to develop your own survey? Really thinking about your communication strategy and your survey administration strategies and and thinking about your feedback to support decision making. That's all about. I want to thank you for joining us today. It's covered about the ESSA survey feedback report. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us about or to continue participation